This podcast is brought to you by ProLongevity, the award-winning 8-week program that can transform the lives of people with prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, and many other lifestyle-related illnesses. Founded by Phillips, the pharmacist who gave up drugs.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the ProLongevity podcast. Now, as many of you know, I attended the Keto conference in Switzerland last year, and I met a number of really fascinating people. And amongst the most fascinating people I met was a young lady called Eleanor, who taught me everything I need to know about migraine and has a really interesting history. So, Dr. Elena Gross, please introduce yourself to our audience and just tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Graham, thank you so much for having me. And it was a huge pleasure to meet you and have you now in my circles of dear keto colleagues and family. So my background is a neuroscience by training. I'm a neuroscientist. I have a PhD in clinical research and a bachelor in psychology. But most importantly, I'm an ex-chronic migraine patient. So as Graham said, I used to have terrible migraines, which are these one-sided headaches, which are also accompanied by sensory problems, by other neurological symptoms such as nausea, light sensitivity, noise sensitivity, smell sensitivity. Moving makes it worse. It's a pulsating, burning kind of a headache, usually one-sided, that is impossible to ignore. So you wake up from it. You can't go to sleep. You can't just go for a walk. Water won't make it better. So it was really taking over control of my life. So that's also why I went into neuroscience, to eventually figure out what migraine really is and what you can do about it, because not much was known. And I went from specialist to specialist. I tried everything on the pharma side of things and the alternative side of things, like acupuncture, Chinese herbal medicines, and so on, but also the drugs, the anti-epileptics, the anticonvulsants, all of these things that were prescribed just to make a bit of a dent at the pain. As it didn't get better, I studied neuroscience to eventually better understand this disease. And towards the end of my degree, already stumbled across something that, after lots of trial and error, gave me my life back. I did a PhD on the topic. And when I realized that classic pharma companies like Roche and Novartis are not going to do anything about it, I eventually founded a startup halfway through my PhD that is called Keto Swiss. And we just launched the first migraine medical food in the world, actually in the US, 6 months ago. And retention rate is looking good. We have some really happy patients. It's not working for everyone, but the big realization, and that's what we'll be diving in today, is that actually migraine, or at least a large subgroup of migraine, can be as much a metabolic disease as a neurological one. And the good thing about this is we can absolutely change metabolism. We can positively influence or even fix metabolism, while we cannot really change the hardwiring of our brain very targetedly just yet. And so the big news for today, this will be a podcast of hope, because it will give you with the tools and the understanding to hopefully take back your health in your own hands and reclaim your life.
Fantastic. So that's a brilliant encapsulation of a multi-year journey. But let me take you back. Let's recover this in a bit more detail. So take me back to your sort of 12, 13-year-old self and how life was. And how did this whole migraine, you didn't know it was migraine, but this thing, this syndrome, this pain and this life-changing thing took your life. So just describe how life was for you and what the effects were, because I remember as a young boy, my mum used to get migraine. I realised now it was probably menstrual migraine, and she'd be, take to her bed for 2 or 3 days. That's all I knew. But I've not heard anyone describe migraine and suffer from migraine the way that you did. And I want people to understand at its worst what life is really like.
Yeah. So when I was 14, it started. So the interesting bit was that I had a very irregular period. This is when my period kind of started, with around 14. And I was prescribed the contraceptive pill just to kind of get my periods regular. And now I'm putting this together that half a year later, my first migraine ever happened. And at the time, nobody knew what it was like. So I remember my dad saying, it's a headache, go to bed, just go to sleep. I would wake up from sleep. I would have this terrible pain. Nobody was there. I was alone in my room. I remember there was no painkillers inside. I didn't know what to do. I tried to crawl to the bathroom. I was literally lying on the bathroom floor. I was seeing the pain medication was up on the counter somewhere, but I couldn't get up from the floor because the pain was so excruciating when I would get up that I didn't know how to get to the painkillers. And I was literally like collapsing and crying, and I didn't know what to do anymore until my parents found me at some point in the bathroom, right? So that was like my first memories of this thing when my parents said, okay, we've got to get you to the hospital. There's something is not right here. My GP didn't know what was going on. They were sending me to brain scans. If I had a tumor, that could be a possibility. I was doing all these scans. I was sent to a psychologist, and all they would ask is like, you have stress at school, what's your worst subject? And my worst subject was really not that bad. So clearly wasn't that. Finally, Dr. Google gave us the answer when my mom remembered that her mom had these terrible headaches. When she was young, she didn't take them as seriously. She was like, oh, what is she whining about? But really, I mean, migraine then it was still episodic. It would then get much worse throughout the next decades. When I was halfway through my bachelor's degree, it had become chronic. And this was really when I didn't know how to go with the pain anymore. 20 days plus a month in pain. It would never go away. It would just change sides. So 3 days at a time, as you said, 3 days knockout. I was lucky enough that the painkillers, very potent painkillers, the triptans, would work to some extent, but then it would always come back full force after. I was on antidepressant drugs. I would anticonvulsants or topiramate. I would be sitting with my best friends over coffee. I would have no idea what her name is, right? I would lose words like different or donut or like really words that are super hard to describe. During my degree at Oxford, where really remembering words to pass degrees and write essays is at the essence of what you have to do. So I was scared of failing every day, and somehow I managed. I don't even know how, but it was at times it really wasn't a life worth living. And the worst case, and I wrote a whole poem about it that I only recently read out to a fellow chronic migraine patient, that I was basically living life behind the blinds. And I was envying everybody that was beyond the blinds, living their lives just a normal life, every chore, every day, meeting friends. I missed most of the school trips. I missed 50% of my time in school. I missed these like early childhood experiences that will never come back just because of migraine, right? So the pain is one thing, but also the missing out of experience when you are sick, and the experience that will never come back, right? But I don't want to complain for too long, because lucky enough, towards the end of my degree, I got my brain back way earlier than I ever had imagined. I was thinking that this would be the rest of my life, and I would dedicate my life and my research to maybe better understand this disease. And luckily for me, it happened way earlier than I ever imagined. Now I'm sitting here with you. I can actually work a 150, 200% startup job, right? And whatever it requires for 5 years now, and really fight for bringing this to other patients like me and getting the word out. So thanks for having me here. But yeah, migraine is nothing you'd wish upon anyone. And sadly, it's mainly a female disease. So it's 3 to 1, female to male, which also means, interestingly, it gets a lot less research attention. So, compared to, there's 1 billion people in the world that have migraine, compared to much, much rarer diseases, it gets a fraction of the funding. It was really hard even for the PhD. There was like 5 labs in the world that study migraine at the time, right? Plus minus bigger labs. So it was even like where to go, right? So there was not a lot of attention. And even 30 years back or so, maybe now more 40 years, migraine was referred to as hysteria. That was literally like the name, which also sounds very psychological, right? Like, women, man up, what are you whining about? Even though whoever has had just a single migraine attack, they know how excruciating this can be. But
well, it's quite misogynist, isn't it? Hysteria, hysterectomy. It's got that connotation about it, and not for no reason. I mean, as you say, it's women suffer more, but women are less well represented, and it's a form of health inequality all of its own, which I think that's probably improved. Can you look back and see any predictive features that were there, but you didn't recognise, and that you would, a young girl that's getting the following, that is predicting?
Yeah. Excellent question. And I love how these questions I haven't been asked before. So that makes it interesting for me too. So I think what happened when I was born, my twin was already dead pre-birth, and I had severe liver failure. So they almost wanted to do a blood transfusion on a newborn because my liver wasn't working. And in the year after, I was screaming for a whole year. Detoxification, I now know that I have mutations in the antioxidant genes, SOD2, superoxide dismutase 2, but also NAT2 and the glutathione S transferases. So I'm not a good detoxer. My phase 2 liver detox doesn't work well. I'm not very good with oxidative stress.
Just before you carry on, put that in slightly more lay terms.
My energy metabolism doesn't work very well, right?
Right.
So, and that was already present at birth or in my childhood years, in the sense that I would get very frequent infections. I was never a very slim girl. I wasn't unathletic, but I wouldn't have much stamina, which I think is also due to the mitochondria, the powerhouse in the cells not working well. If I look back, my mom has always been tired. My grandma too. Like they've always been tired. And a child gets their mitochondria from their mother's line, not from their father's predominantly. So I think this whole mitochondrial, this energy deficiency had already been passed on to me. And then also this problem of liver. And the liver actually doesn't only detox. The liver also is responsible for making energy for you when you're fasting. When you're not ingesting fuel, the liver will break up the glycogen, the glucose storage. They will break up the fatty acids in order to ensure that you have enough energy demand. So I was never the healthiest child for sure. And I would say that liver and energy metabolism were also always my weaknesses, which also translated into bad immune function. So whenever I had an infection, just like could be just a cold, I would always say as a child, I have the sleeping disease. So a simple cold would knock me out for 2 weeks. I would literally sleep for 2 weeks. And I now understand that when your immune response tries to fight an invader, like a virus or a bacteria, the bombs are free radicals, oxidative stress. So my body was destroying the virus, producing oxidative stress, which is damaging my energy metabolism. So because I don't have that antioxidants defense genetically that other people have. So that's how it kind of like comes full circle. So I think these genetics and maybe epigenetic mechanisms that have been passed on through birth, right? They were already there. And
so you've got kind of two things going on: being female, which predisposes you to migraine,
yes,
and then certain aspects of your genetic history, because this isn't just you; this goes to your family.
Yes,
so
exactly.
It's a kind of double whammy.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's probably linked, right? So for sure, the energy metabolism. Yes, absolutely. So and I got the worst of both worlds from my dad and my mom. I also know that now.
Yeah.
But I would say that liver and antioxidants defense and energy metabolism genetics is what predisposes people for migraine risk.
Yeah.
And then if you're born into a perfect world, it will still not express, right? If you're born into a paleo, keto, and non-toxic world where there's no oxidative stress or psychological, mental stress, your migraine genetics won't express. But for me, it wasn't the perfect world at all, right?
So you've got predisposing factors, and then superimposed on that, you've got kind of a modern lifestyle.
Exactly.
And, you know, I kind of feel that as a species, if you look back to our origins and you look through the journey in the last 100, 200 years, almost nothing that we do is natural and normal. We don't interact with the environment in the normal way. We eat completely alien food. Our response, our relationship with light has changed completely. Our access to red light, I've been doing a deep dive in red light recently. And you just realize that we've got further and further and further away from our natural origins. And
everything you've just mentioned, it's harming our mitochondria, the powerhouses in our cells. Yeah, so 100% agreed, and I would even go maybe back further than 300 years. But yes, what we do is toxic to our energy metabolism.
Yeah, and then you can go back sort of 10,000 years when we first became farmers and our diet changed. So absolutely, this probably started back then when people have forgotten what our natural diet is. We're so far from it that we think our natural diet is processed food, and nothing could be further from the truth. And our natural diet is full of carbs. Nothing could be further from the truth. And then we've imposed all these things on ourselves. And the further away we get from it, the more artificial things we try to introduce to put it right. And I kind of think that we're just adding problems on top of problems. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself.
No, you're so right. I mean, I always try to look at the things from an evolutionary lens, which is exactly, I go 10,000 plus years back, or whatever I know what was happening then, and check what was happening there against what is happening today within reason. And 10,000 years back is when farming came into the picture. Now it was, of course, completely different to today. But what I can say is that the brain is a very unique organ in terms of its energy metabolism and metabolic needs, in the sense that it's surrounded by the blood-brain barrier all around that protects it from foreign agents to come in easily, which is essential. But it also prevents very large molecules to come in. So the brain is dependent on 3 molecules, small molecules, to come in to fuel it properly. One is glucose, we all know that.
Yeah.
One is lactate, happening when we do exercise, and one category is ketone bodies. Now,
Yeah.
the sedentary modern Western human, including me, who was on a low fat, low protein, no sugars, but still like a carbohydrate diet, because I was thinking even vegan for 1 month, thinking that's the healthy thing to do, right? And got me even sicker, I guess. But yeah, in the modern world, we are all reliant on one single fuel source, glucose. And glucose we can't store very well. And the
Yeah.
other thing that makes the brain special is it's very small, like 2% of the body's mass, but uses up 25% of the energy. And the last thing is because it's surrounded by a skull as well as this blood-brain barrier, there's literally no space to store any fuel. So it's dependent on the rest of the body to supply it with energy. Now, when we went from paleo, like hunters and gatherers, to primarily farmers, we lost a very effective energy source, which is these ketone bodies, for a large period of time, as well as we lost a lot of bioavailable ingredients, nutrients that were part of meat, for example, intestines, and so on, right? So if you go to a grain that will have, or a plant-based diet primarily, that will have less bioactive versions of vitamins and nutrients that are less bioavailable and need to be converted using energy and enzymes. So I think this is where all of it started. Now, of course, we were still in a natural environment. Now, on top of this, deprivation got worse and worse. Even though we have all have excess calories, getting the right number of calories doesn't mean we get enough energy. This is like diesel into a petrol tank, right? That's not going to get you very far. And not very good, right? So that's one of the biggest realization I had when studying, is that I always thought a calorie is a calorie. So as long as I stay under a calorie limit, my body will work. It needs so much more than just the calories. So, and then on top of that is all the stresses that you mentioned, toxins, 80,000 new toxins being introduced in the world in the last 50 years. Cancer rates going up, right? We don't know what they do. They end up in our water, in our air. Nobody gives a shit, sorry. We have a lot of plastics floating around. We have heavy metals floating around. We have artificial lights, blue lights, kind of a physical stressor. We have so much stress. I mean, I'm the worst one here to say because I work all the time, constant multitasking, right? Checking your phone, doing the meetings, writing emails. Like, we don't sit on a train or we walk anywhere and we do nothing anymore.
Yeah.
When do we not do anything? Our brain is constantly in overload, right? So there's all the things you mentioned, 100%. And all these different things come down to a very common pathway. They all hit the mitochondria negatively, those ancient bacteria that are now inside of our cells making our energy. Very vulnerable, but very essential to life. And everything is hurting them. So I think most of these civilization diseases have in common that they have damaged mitochondria. So if you don't have migraine, this doesn't mean you shouldn't be listening to this, because
Absolutely.
it's essential for longevity and other things as well, right?
So just to recap a couple of things. I think most people imagine that when we eat, it's like fueling a car, right? So you put the petrol in, and you can see the fuel gauge does that, and eventually the tank is full. You put the lid on, you apply a spark, and it generates energy, and that energy makes the car go, and the output broadly is carbon dioxide and water. And so that's calories, right? That's energy being converted to move things along. And that's an easy thing to understand.
Yes.
Human metabolism is infinitely more complex than that. And this is the point I always make, that if you look at the fundamentals of human metabolism, actually we don't need very much energy. What we need is the right combination of vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and the right fats.
I mean, you say we don't need much energy. We convert 70 kilograms of ATP a day. Our body's worth, I think that's a hell of a lot of energy.
Okay.
I mean, if you, right? But yes, it's more complicated. But even in your car example, you don't give water to cool it. You don't give any oil. It's not going to work either, right? So even this example needs cofactors. And it needs the right diesel. So if you did give a diesel motor petrol or the other way around, it will also not work.
Doesn't end well.
Even though it has the same energy, right? So if you give the wrong fuel source, or if you put, I don't know, vegetable oil in your tank, that's also a high calorie, high energy thing. It's not going to work either. So firstly, you need to give the right fuel to the right engine.
Exactly that.
Fuel engine is the human, and maybe glucose is not the primary and the best engine, even though it works partially, right? So that's the first thing. And then you need to give all these cofactors that I was never aware of, those micronutrients, those trace minerals that our soils are so deprived of, those electrolytes that aren't in our foods anymore, those water-soluble, fat-soluble vitamins,
Yeah.
and the amino acids that you talked about, right? That they need to build our tissues and our enzymes. So you need so much more than just the oil and water. But it's similar to a car, that it's not just the fuel, and it needs to be the right kind of fuel.
So we'll kind of come back to that at the end, because we'll come back to that, because one of the things I want to discuss with you is MigraKet, which, spoiler alert, is a special formulation of ketones and supplements for migraine. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's say a little bit more about mitochondria, because it's come up several times. I would have introduced it later on, but what's your simple explanation of mitochondria? Because we need to overcome this. It's quite scientific and complicated, but unless we get our heads around that, I don't think anything else works that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's crucial to understand. And if you walk away with one thing out of this podcast, it's probably the new love of mitochondria, hopefully.
Absolutely.
So let's go back, actually now not 10,000, but millions and millions of years ago.
4 billion years, probably.
4 billion, probably, right?
Yeah.
When the Earth was just a few volcanoes and this ancient soup, and a bit of oxygen is now arriving in the atmosphere. Now, we have single-celled organisms that are now living in this ancient soup 4 billion years ago, and we have little bacteria as well. And the bacteria are now being exposed to these free radicals that we all have heard before, oxidative stress, right? Which is very damaging to even us to this day, to any organism in excess, and can cause aging and all of that. So the bacteria are swimming that soup, and these free radical bombs are attacking it, and it's very vulnerable. So it is thinking about a very potent first networking kind of event. So it sees these single-celled organisms, and they have problems with making energy. So it fuses with a single-celled organism. So a very powerful coalition. So the mitochondria, this ancient bacteria, is now getting a shelter from the bombs. And in return, it has to give its protector something. So it says, hey, I'm going to make you energy. I'm going to make you energy way more efficient than you've ever done it before. And to this day, these ancient bacteria are living in our body. And we all know about the power of the microbiome now, how we're more microbiome than we are actually human. But we're actually even more mitochondria than we are microbiome. And
Absolutely.
we have 37 trillion mitochondria in our cells, these ancient bacteria that are happily in there and making our energy more efficiently than we would otherwise by a process that's called glycolysis, where we just break up sugar into a bit of ATP, a bit of energy in the just the medium in the cell. And these mitochondria, they make up to 36 ATP per glucose molecule if they're efficient. And they do this via something that we don't need to understand, I don't think, this electron transport chain. So they transport electrons with cofactors. This is where you need all your micronutrients to actually have the different enzymes and the different parts of the mitochondria working. Now, there's one more thing that I want people to understand, is that because they come from bacterial origin, mitochondria actually have their own DNA. So they bring their own DNA with it. But these mitochondria are now floating around our cells like they used to in the single-celled organism in that ancient soup. They still float around in there. And because they don't have a nucleus like our cells do, this mitochondrial DNA is not so well protected. So if we have oxidative stress, which makes that age, it's mutating quicker, and we don't have complicated repair on there. So now when I say that everything we do today, as opposed to 10,000 years plus back, is hurting our mitochondria, this is these little guys that make energy for us, sitting unprotected in the inside of the cell. And a lot of the toxins, whether this is light, stress, free radicals, toxins, they kind of harm these things because they have very little protection. And they get hit quite easily by these different stressors. So that would be my mitochondrial summary.
Yeah, that's your 101 mitochondria. So just to add a couple of things.
Please, yes.
When people talk about reactive oxygen species and oxidative stress, it all sounds incredibly complicated. And indeed, it is incredibly complicated. So just think about rust, right? Rust is also a form of oxidation. Think about your body rusting. Or just think about when you put a piece of toast in the toaster and it goes brown. That's another form of oxidation. And we know that those things don't end well. So it's that kind of process going on inside our individual cells. And of course, if they're happening in individual cells, they can be happening across the majority of your metabolism and doing damage.
So free radicals are a bit like little bombs. They're very reactive. So wherever they bounce into, they destroy it. So
Yeah.
then it looks rusty or it's burned, right? And luckily, we have bomb neutralizers in our body that can kind of cut the flame off. Those are your antioxidant molecules. But in me, for example, when I said these very complicated words at the beginning, this SOD2 and so on, these are the bomb neutralizers. So in my case, they're mutated. So depending on your genetics, you have better or worse functioning bomb neutralizers.
Yeah.
And if you have the worst functioning ones, then you're more predisposed to things like migraine or maybe other neuropsychiatric or civilization diseases.
All sorts of problems. The other thing about the mitochondria, so, you know, when I did my degree, I understood about they generate energy and it was known as the battery of the cell. But all the latest science shows that mitochondria do far, far, far more than that. They move around the cell and they literally organize the cell. They can join together and they can split apart. And the latest research shows that they can actually move between cells. So they are actually, if you think about the organizing infrastructure of a multicellular, I mean, just a single cell is unbelievably complex with incredible reactions going on inside every cell. Multiply that across 100 trillion cells and then add all the cells that you were talking about in the microbiota. All of this is kind of organized by our mitochondria.
It's super complex, and the problem is still so simple, right? Because all of these things damage, so the mitochondria do so many things. We talked about detoxification before. Research shows now that mitochondria are a vital part of detoxing harmful substances, which kind of leads us to a vicious circle, right? We have these toxins damaging the mitochondria, which means they can excrete them less well, which means then more of these will accumulate, damage the mitochondria further, and so there will be less excretion again. So mitochondria have so many different roles, even detoxification, which is why keeping them happy could be the most important thing for a long health span. And without me even, I mean, so complex, I don't even understand fully, like not even close to understand fully how any of this works, right? And I studied some of this, at least, I mean, a neuroscience that's not really metabolism, but I think it's important to understand that a lot of things we do are harming, and what can we do to unharm or make things better in the inverse.
That's the bad news. And the good news is once you fix your mitochondria, you kind of fix everything.
Yeah,
because
and everything is energy.
Everything starts to work properly. And it's not just the migraine, right? It's epilepsy, it's mental health, it's type 2 diabetes, it's obesity, it's heart disease, it's cancer.
Alzheimer's,
All roads lead to mitochondria. And that's what's so fascinating about it.
Exactly. That's why we need to mind them more. Mind your mitochondria. But few people know they're even there, right? So this is the first step to say, look, there's this thing in the cell and you need to mind that, and what can you do? And it's becoming intrinsically hard because there's so many things that you cannot avoid anymore. But there's some things that are in our control, maybe not 100% of the time, but at least some of the time, or the majority of the time, when you're at your home or when you're in control of the cooking or the lighting. Or you'll see, even now I paint all my light bulbs yellow. So you'll see it's kind of a dim light. You don't see me so well anymore. But when the sun goes down, I don't want blue light or white light. It hurts my migraine eyes, but it's also not very good. Like blue light increases oxidative stress even via the skin by 50%. And your retina as well. So there's so many things that increase oxidative stress, these free radical bombs, which also will destroy your mitochondria and harm them long term.
So let's go back somewhat. And let's talk about migraine. What is migraine? I think a lot of people think about migraine headache just means a very bad headache. But actually, migraine is quite specific, and it's not the same as a general headache, although some of the symptoms are overlapping. So talk me through how you would diagnose migraine, what migraine actually is in terms of A, symptoms, and B, what's going on inside us.
Yeah, so I quickly described this a bit at the beginning, right? So migraine typically is a one-sided headache. It can be both-sided, but typically your tension type headache will be some pressure on the forehead or on the back. It's typically both-sided. So the first thing that should ring your alarm bells if you get a one-sided headache, or at least it starts one-sided. And that's the biggest key that it could be migraine. Now, it's medium to severe. It's not something that is mild, so you can go on about your day. With a migraine, you will stop whatever. You will wake up from it. You cannot go to bed. It's really that severe. It will make you nauseous. Some people throw up. And it comes with this very clear neurosensory issues such as light sensitivity, noise sensitivity. All of these things will be very uncomfortable. even smell sensitivity. So it's crazy. Like my dad would never believe me that I could like smell things 200 meters away. It's absolutely true, right? Everything becomes more stimulant. Everything that is a stimulant, sensory stimulant, becomes more intense. And then a third of people actually even have an aura phase, 30 minutes or so before the headache phase starts, in which they get sensory disturbances such as they go blind on one side of the visual field, or they get flickering lights, or they get numbness in part of the visual field, or tingling, or they get speech difficulties, or they get like shivers, like with a fever. So really other things that are going on in the brain. And then it has a premonitory phase, which is the phase that is preceding all of this. This is when you have the first signs, like you start to yawn because your brain is craving more oxygen. You get either tired or you get very, very like excited, kind of like searching for stuff, or agitated. You get food cravings before, probably your brain starving, thinking now you need to eat something very high in sugar and fat. You get irritated. Some people pee more, like this autonomic system. Some people get teary in the eye. And then you have the post-drome phase. Now, after all of this is done, which can take up to 3 days, then you are just plain exhausted. And that's the post-drome. And so that's your typical phases: post-drome, aura, headache phase. So premonitory, aura, headache phase, post-drome. That would be your migraine attack cycle. And you ask what's going on in the brain. Now, this is a good question. We know a little bit about it. So we know that pre-migraine, the hypothalamus is turned on in the brain. The hypothalamus is your center that controls your temperature, your breathing, your, say, homeostasis in the body. So that's turned on, which probably is a key that homeostasis is a threat, right? So say you are running out of energy, you would expect your hypothalamus to be turned on to now counter-regulatory measures. Interestingly, the early experiments over 50 years back have shown that preceding and the early phases of a headache phase, you will see that ketogenesis, lipolysis is turned on. So the body starts to create other alternative energy sources, probably because it is sensing that energy deficiency, right?
Yeah.
Then you have the aura phase. Now, this is a very interesting phase as well, because we exactly know what is happening there thanks to neuroimaging techniques. So during the aura phase, there is an electrical wave of activity flowing through your visual cortex or wherever else you have an issue. This is a bit like a tsunami. It's a tsunami wave. It's a wave of electrons firing, followed by a period of depression and no activity at all. And this is what you can basically see when you have an aura. You see the wave traveling across the cortex, but you see it in the eye, or you feel it in the arm, right, wherever it travels. And then the destruction after basically means that you have to shift ions that have been against their concentration gradients, and there's a lot, like a tsunami, there's a lot of destruction that has to be reversed, and that increases energy demands in the brain drastically, which then again can potentially trigger the headache phase. Now, the headache phase we've discussed, we know that the physiological correlate of the headache phase is the activation of the trigeminal vascular system, which innervates your brain. So this is this nerve that goes through here. Now, when that's activated too much, that's basically the pain signal. But the biggest question is always like, why the hell does this get even activated in the first place? So we can explain that, but nobody could really ever explain to me, why does it get activated, right? So there's a lot of wild theories, but my favorite, as you know, is this energy deficiency. And then the post-drome, you're fatigued. And we can come into this energy deficiency link in a bit if you like. But that's the migraine in a nutshell.
I think that's right. Just circling back, so you've described the normal 3 phases of migraine, but a lot of people get an atypical presentation.
Yes.
So in my case, for example, I think 3 times in my life I had the prodrome. And because I knew what a migraine was, I started to get this broken up visual field and flashing lights. So I thought,
aura.
you're going to get a migraine. Interestingly, I've never had the migraine. So I get the prodrome, and I have to stop working.
Aura of the migraine, but you didn't have the headache phase. And I should have said this, that now we think that each individual phase can actually happen on its own.
Yeah.
So even the pre-monitor, sometimes that all the fatigue and everything, and then nothing happens. I think that can happen too. And you can get an aura without the headache. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's what happens to me. And so I just have to take it easy because of my broken visual field. But 20 minutes later, it's gone. And it's only happened a few times, and I'm thinking, terrible headache's coming next, and it never has.
My friend gets regular migraine also, and he says when he has the aura, that's its one chance to get it right. So he then takes the MigraKet, he lies down, he goes to sleep if possible. So if he then stops doing things and rests, then he can stop the headache from still happening. If he doesn't, then the full-blown migraine comes. If he overrides that signal, then the migraine, the terrible pain follows. But yes, it's a good point. These can happen individually.
So the next question is why? Because if you think about pain normally happens for a reason, right? It's not without reason that we feel pain.
Absolutely right. And there's so few people that actually think this. I love that. So pain is a warning signal, right? Now think about what does a migraine do? A migraine basically forces you to withdraw into a dark room, to rest, to lie down still, because movement makes it worse. Anything that makes you spend more energy, just as light, noises, anything makes it worse. Moving makes it worse. So you basically lie down and rest until energy homeostasis has been restored. And it's very interesting that if you think about your body has a genetic component, right? Your migraine has a genetic part, which is you're not very good with energy metabolism, glucose metabolism, for example, or free radicals, or a different metabolic issue. Now, migraine patients also have a very hyperexcitable brain in the sense that they spend a lot more, they don't habituate. Habituation means if a non-migraine patient were to look at a checkerboard or white wall or any stimulus that doesn't change, it will stop firing.
It fades into the background.
It saves the energy. It stops firing. A migraine patient, its brain will not shut off. It won't habituate. It will keep firing even though there's no change. Now, going back 10,000 plus years, I always think, why would every seventh person have a hyperactive brain like this? It wouldn't be passed on if there wasn't a benefit of this, right?
Exactly.
Back then, we could still afford that every seventh person has that energy demanding brain. Now, if you think about a tribe of, 40 people lying around a campfire, there would be 5 people with a hyperexcitable brain that are the first ones to wake up and save the tribe from a tiger.
Exactly.
Or some kind of threat, right? Now, today, I wake up every crack. I hate my brain for this. I don't, but it's less evolutionary advantageous in a world today, but it used to be back then. So in summary, we have a very metabolically demanding brain with problems in metabolism, at least glucose metabolism and oxidative stress, which is ubiquitous today. And we also have more energy demand, 20% actually. So a migraine's brain has 16% on average less energy, even between migraine attacks in the brain. It's massive. So we have more demand and less supply. This is the perfect storm. Now, if you put this brain in today's environment, then you have all this free radical bombs, oxidative stress, you have a lot of glucose, you have less efficient ketone bodies, you have less micronutrients. So the brains, these high performance brains, these high energy demanding brains, or let's say a Ferrari, doesn't get...
It needs rocket fuel, but you're putting diesel into it.
Exactly, it needs rocket fuel, but you put diesel in it. Now, what does the brain do? It's warning us. It's telling us, hey, bling, 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 this isn't working, right? And when we're not listening, then it's pulling the plug. It's forcing us with the migraine to rest until energy homeostasis has been restored, because that's all it can do. Now, when you look at the mechanism that happened during a migraine, literally, we have ketoneogenesis turned on. So ketone bodies are being produced, this alternative energy source. We have fats being broken up. We have cortisol going up. We have a metabolic repair. Now, interestingly, we also have these pain peptides that are being released. And one of them is called CGRP. And CGRP is that molecule that is now inhibited by these monoclonal antibodies, drugs, these migraine injections that they can give you. They block CGRP as one pain peptide that hurts. But interestingly, what I found in the research for this review article is that this very same molecule is also a potent antioxidant. It's a bomb neutralizer. So the body is sending that signal. It's increasing the pain to force us to rest, and at the same time also getting rid of the oxidative stress and producing an alternative energy source to the rescue. So energy conserving behavior via the pain, as well as a metabolic rescue. And that's your migraine attack. And hopefully that will lead to the resolution. But understanding this also means that at least in a large subgroup of migraine where metabolism is a problem, if we fix the energy deficiency part, the warning signal doesn't need to be turned on anymore. And I'm saying migraine is your friend. Migraine is the fire alarm, not the fire.
Exactly.
We have to extinguish the fire and not shut off the fire alarm.
So this is exactly right. I always say that, if you're playing a game of football and you break your leg, no one would say, well, take some morphine, keep running.
Yeah.
Right? That would be a very bad strategy.
Yeah.
Because the pain in the leg is representing of something. That pain is to stop you running on a broken leg.
Exactly.
By the same token, if, as we've both agreed, migraine is a protective mechanism for a brain that's basically saying, help, there's all this light and sound and stuff happening on inside me and I haven't got enough energy, you have to stop now. Simply ignoring the signal in the long term can't be a good thing. You need to understand, why did you get that signal? It has to be a protective mechanism, particularly, as you said, migraine is very, very common. And why would it be so common? If evolution was working as you'd expect it to do, we'd have got rid of migraine, but we haven't.
It wouldn't be a billion people that have it. It makes no sense.
But when you think about it, so if you think about the tribe and the person who's going to be on watch, right, to protect the tribe from whoever's going to come and attack you, what do you want them? You want to have a fantastic sense of smell, fantastic sense of hearing, and to be the alarm signal. Mm-hmm. And I see this, Karen, my partner, has this. So if I leave a tap dripping, to me, after 2 or 3 minutes, the sound of that dripping tap has faded into the background. Mm-hmm. I'm not even aware of it. And Karen was saying, can you not stop that tap? Because for her, the tap drips and drips and it's getting louder and louder.
She's not imitating. She's still hearing it. Exactly.
She can still hear it. And but the same thing, she can hear things that I don't hear. And if I concentrate really, really hard, I can hear the little thing that she's heard. So clearly, there's a whole concept of migraine brain, which is this hypersensitivity to smell and sight, which when you think about it from a protective point of view, the night watchman, it's fantastic. But if you think about that in a modern environment where, unlike most people's brain, which gradually switches off to these signals and doesn't need all the energy, you've got, as you rightly say, the migraine brain needs more energy and it needs the right nutrition, not calories, nutrition. And so we know that the brain is already sensitive and it has few protective mechanisms. And then in circumstances like that, you feed it the wrong fuel. For someone with that genetic predisposition, they will react in a much more severe way, which kind of explains your history as a teenager, right? And as an undergraduate.
Then when you think of it even further, it's again kind of a vicious circle. You have those hypersensitivities, but then filtering out stimuli in the brain requires tremendous amount of energy. Now, you already are hypersensitive. If you don't have enough energy, your filtering will break down, which means now the dripping tab or whatever it is, or that smell of the perfume is even more intense. And all these stimuli coming in are even more intense because you can't filter properly anymore. And I think some of that we also see in diseases like autism. Autism, I think, also have a filtering problem. They also have sometimes stimuli way too intense coming in that are more benign for other people. But yes, I agree that migraineurs or some other people's brains need even more attention, and we need to be even more careful because we have that more energy demand compared to a non-migraine person's brain.
Do you want to make some comment as to the relationship between migraine and epilepsy? Because they're being broadly reviewed as the same thing now, aren't they?
Yeah, I'm not sure they're the same thing, but what you can see interestingly is that some forms of epilepsy can grow into migraine or can grow out into a migraine. So some people say, well, there's definitely a genetic commonality between the two. They're related. Epilepsy and migraine are related. Now, when you think about this cortical spreading depression, this wave of electricity flowing over the cortex in an aura phase, right? That's very similar to an epileptic seizure, where there's also neurons firing uncontrollably and together. That's basically the definition of a seizure, right? So those two are genetically related, not all forms of epilepsy, but there is an overlap, and there's an overlap in symptoms and I guess in genetics as well.
Which also explains why some of the anti-epileptic drugs, the anti-seizure drugs, are also used for migraine.
What anti-epileptic drugs basically do is they reduce the likelihood of neurons to fire. Yeah. And that's basically beneficial in migraine too, because you have this constantly firing. So that's what you want to do. So basically, interestingly, again, when you have an energy deficiency, and this is maybe also why a ketogenic diet works so well in some forms of epilepsy, is that when you have less energy, then the dam between the inside and the outside of the neuron breaks down. So basically, whether a neuron fires or not depends on a difference in charge, electrical charge between the inside and the outside of the neuron, of the cell. This is a bit like a dam that keeps away the waves crashing over at a coastal city. The higher the dam, the less likely your waves are going to crash over it.
Yep.
So the wave is the electrical signal, is the neuron potential, or the signal being sent in the brain. And keeping the dam high up requires energy. Now, whenever, and this is called the resting membrane potential for the nerds out there, but you don't have to know that. So whenever that dam becomes lower, you have more likelihood of neurons firing.
Yeah.
Whenever you have less energy, that potential will come lower. And this will make the chance of an epileptic seizure as well as a migraine attack much more likely.
Yeah.
And I think that's where there's a commonality there as well.
Yeah. So we've kind of talked about the fact that, so we've got a brain that's very energy hungry. And we've talked about the fact we're broadly in westernized civilizations, we're running our body on the wrong fuel. But let's kind of go a bit more into what are the things that predispose to migraines? I'm thinking dietary aspects, lack of sleep, light.
The triggers or predisposition.
The triggers. Yeah.
Triggers, yeah.
Yeah.
So trigger factors are very varied, but they have a common denominator. So it can be altitude, so lack of oxygen. It can be weather. Weather is change of pressure and hence, again, oxygen in the air, actually. So there's, again, a physiological correlate to this. Even though people think weather, they might be crazy. There's alcohol. Alcohol increases oxidative stress. Then there's skipping a meal. There's exercise, especially intense exercise. Then we have things like not being hydrated, not drinking enough, not eating enough. High sugary foods, processed foods can trigger migraine, but also chemicals like MSG is a very potent trigger factor. Also, some artificial flavors and other chemicals can trigger migraine. Then we have perfumes that also contain a lot of toxins. Cigarette smoke can trigger migraines and other odors generally. And then some people say that certain foods that are high, for example, in histamine or tyrosine can also trigger migraine. And then, of course, sleep deficiency, but also sleeping too much, which is probably then the other thing, caffeine withdrawal, or too much caffeine, because caffeine is the gas pedal, but doesn't actually give you fuel. So this is another thing that can trigger migraine. Stress of any form, or the stopping of stress. So when the adrenaline comes down, finally, that can also trigger migraine after a very stressful period. So you can have it in the relaxation period, the weekend coming, and so on. I hope I haven't forgotten anything, but I think those are the top ones.
Yeah, I mean, the list goes on and on, but we don't necessarily want to produce an exhausted list so much as give people a sense of what the likely triggers are. So much of this is environmental. So if you've got, we'll come on to the supplements, but before that, I want to talk about lifestyle adjustments. So if you were talking to your teenage self, knowing what you now know,
yes,
and you can't change all these things. So if you were talking to your teenage self, what would you say is the number one thing? Do this and then do that. What would your order be in order to minimize the risk of future migraines and to improve the general quality of life?
Yeah, that's a good question. And for this, I've actually have kind of developed a 4-pillar model on how I mastered migraine, or what I would be recommending anybody who has a migraine predisposition or a migraine in their family. So basically, the first pillar here is that you balance blood glucose. This will supply your brain with a more stable form of energy. We know that glucose is one of the essential brain fuels for the brain. So what we don't want is a roller coaster. And that basically means at least a low glycemic index diet. That means no processed foods, no high sugary foods, and basically making sure, maybe also limiting your fasting if that leads to hypoglycemia in some patients, right? Basically ensuring that you have a stable blood glucose supply at all times. Interestingly, this category also involves behavioral changes, which is adequate sleep. If you don't have enough sleep, this is very stressful. This can get blood sugar skyrocket or also lead to hypoglycemia at some point. And this also manages stress control, because stress will also increase your blood sugar quite drastically sometimes. And this means learn to say no by getting rid of toxic relationships. all of these things that are stressing you out, maybe even changing your job if it must. That goes in the first pillar of blood glucose control. Now, the second pillar feeds into what we've been talking about a lot. This is these bombs that are destroying stuff, the mitochondria, the energy houses, your DNA. So there's two things that are factoring in here. Now, for one, you want to limit the oxidative stress that comes in from the outside or is produced by your body. These are the bombs. And then you want to strengthen the bomb neutralizers. These are your antioxidant molecules. So what comes into this category? Here, it's very important that you basically limit toxins in your food. So try to get organic, local stuff if possible, right? Because toxins increase these bombs. Toxins are the primary bomb. This also means looking out for your hygiene products. What are you cleaning your bathroom and your kitchen with? Looking at your cosmetics. What's in your foundation, in your lotion, in your toothpaste? This looks into your water quality, your air quality. These can all contain toxins depending on where you are in the world. Your food, this would be reducing fish that's full of mercury and lead in most cases. And then increasing your antioxidant capacity. This could be via taking CoQ10 that is proven to be helpful in migraine. There's clinical studies on CoQ10, for example, very strong antioxidants. Ketone bodies can be antioxidants. So this can be exogenous substances. This also getting your micronutrients in, getting a whole foods diet so that your body can build those bomb neutralizers. Now, the third pillar kind of feeds into that the optimization of micronutrients. So these are the extra stuff we need to make energy. And that will include eating a whole foods diet so that actually nutrients are in the foods that you eat. Highly processed foods almost have no micronutrients. If you don't have the micronutrients, the amino acids, and the building blocks that you need for life, you're constantly hungry. Because your body is saying you've got to eat a lot of cookies to meet your zinc demands, for example. So that means if your diet is based on pizza, cookies, and so on, you've got to eat a lot of them to get your micronutrient demand. So this is important. Yeah. This can also include a high quality, bioavailable or human identical version of supplements that have these micronutrients so that you can make energy, right? So this is diet and supplementation when necessary. Ideally, you can test, but even if you cannot test, then maybe a broad spend, low dose, high quality product. And then the fourth pillar, if none of this is working or if not working enough yet, some already get benefits here and don't need to go on. This would be adding an alternative fuel source to glucose for your brain. If this isn't working, then you're probably not very good at using glucose as a primary brain fuel. So you might want to add an additional brain fuel. Here you could go, for example, on a ketogenic diet. So now you're making your liver, you reduce carbohydrates so much and you limit protein that your liver is starting to make ketone bodies for you. Now, here in a migraine patient, what you have to watch out for is that if you have decades of medication overuse, like I had, it could be that your liver is struggling to get levels high enough. So there's also the possibility to use exogenous ketone bodies either on top of that ketogenic diet or on top of a low carb approach that is not stressful for your liver. So those four pillars, and what I didn't go into a lot is the hormones. So on the micronutrients and the supplementation, if you have menstrual migraine always in front of your period, this could include also bioidentical hormones. If you have hypothyroidism, your metabolism won't work without the thyroid hormone. So this would also include getting a functional medical doctor checking your hormone levels and then supplementing with important bioidentical versions of those hormones, either thyroid or estrogen, progesterone, whatever is recommended. And that's basically that model. Here we have these explained again in a bit more detail. That's the mastering migraine model that I basically developed for myself and now have also incorporated in a book that still hasn't been published. But I have a free white paper that will go into more detail explaining all of these.
Yeah, I have to say, I think your white paper, it's on on your website, which is really insightful and useful. And the book, as you know, I'm sort of 70% through reading the book, and I wish you every success with that. So the final thing I wanted to talk to you about is supplementation, because not only are you a PhD researcher, you're also an entrepreneur. Yeah. It's about the most complicated vitamin supplement I've ever come across in my life. And
compliment, thank you.
It really is. And there's a reason for that. So you have a product called MigraKet, which, as you know, my plan for the pharmacies is to give people an alternative. So we're really good at allopathic medicine. So if you come into my pharmacy and you want allopathic medicine, we can absolutely help you. But if you want to explore alternatives, we can give you complementary medicine rather than sort of trying to make a judgment call, because in the end, it's up to individuals which way they want to go. What I'm planning to do is offer people alternatives. So if you want to go and have orthodox medicine and come and get a prescription medication, we will absolutely do our best to help you with that. But if that's not working for you, or you want to explore alternatives, I kind of think it's an exciting opportunity to do that. So we've got a whole section now of orthomolecular medicine, vitamin supplements, which are quite specific and tailored. And we want to develop a whole portfolio of supplementation and services, and build the whole ProLongevity program around all of that. So it's a pivot point, really. So MigraKet. Talk to me about MigraKet, where the idea came from, how you've built the formulation. It's to say, without going into the weeds of a very complex formulation, but give us some clues into what's in it, why it's in it, why the amounts are in it, what the form is, and how that's specific to migraine. But actually, I suspect if it works for migraine, it might work for many other things, and there's other places you can go with it. So talk us through all of that.
That was a spoiler alert. That is absolutely true. So, well, MigraKet, well, now I've just already introduced to you the different pillars, right? And what I want to show you here. So basically, I was trying to make these 4 pillars a bit easier. So the 4 pillars are there. You can do it almost all by lifestyle. Although some of our soils and foods, even organic, like the best quality products, you don't know what's in the soil. And what it hasn't been in the soil is not going to end up in your vegetable, right? Or whatever you're eating or in your food, right? So it's very, very hard to predict unless you have a lab to send all of these different products to. Then you don't know whether your grocery store is sourcing that salad or that whatever vegetable from the same farm the next time you buy, right? So you have no control whether you have all the micronutrients in the vegetables or in the food you're eating.
You would
right?
get the right nutrients in the right balance, in the right concentrations, in a form that you can absorb.
Exactly.
And actually that becomes quite complicated, because having them there doesn't mean that you can absorb them, particularly if you've got some problems with your absorption. So that's the context.
That comes even on top. So thanks for mentioning that. So people think we are what we eat, but in a sense, we are what we can absorb. And especially migraine, you also have a lot of gastrointestinal problems. I know my gut is still slightly leaky. I have problems with histamine and inflammation. So I'm probably not absorbing a lot of the different stuff. So what I was looking for is giving myself, and in the future also others, a tool that can be added on top of a healthy diet to make sure that you have your foundational needs to make energy. Now, this MigraKet, this is thereby designed, and maybe in the future will evolve and have more things, but currently it's designed to have at least 50% of the formulation is the fuel source we need for the brain, so the ketone bodies. So that some of the glucose in the brain can be replaced with ketone bodies. Now, ketone bodies are also anti-inflammatory. They're free radical catchers. They're potent antioxidants. When you burn them, you also produce less oxidative stress. So they're reducing oxidative stress on many levels. They're also reducing hyperexcitability in the brain. So they're quite a positive alternative.
And that's where, just to interrupt briefly, the origin of the keto diet was to treat epilepsy. And it was discovered that the Greeks knew that if you got kids with epilepsy and you starved them, that was a way to control the epilepsy. But obviously that's not a long-term solution. And
that's why this, the ketogenic diet came about.
It's a fasting mimicking diet, and it turns out that it's the ketones that are the big thing here. So there's a long history of the ketogenic diet going, well, it goes back to the Greeks, but in the last 100 years, it was discovered and then it's been forgotten with the medication, but it's of fundamental importance. So ketone bodies tick.
Yes, so ketone bodies, but here, this is not by the diet or by the liver making them. So we make them in the lab, or actually, this is again when it comes to bacteria, it's bacteria that are fermenting, that are basically making the ketone bodies for us. We flush them away, and so it's in the human identical form. Very important. Yeah. Everything we have here, then comes the B vitamins. All the B vitamins are methylated forms, the human identical forms, not what you would get from your plants.
Yeah.
but what is the version that the body can use? And this is why it's also so expensive to make. Then we have a bit of ketogenic amino acids, leucine and lysine, just because it's been shown that the brain can actually make some ketone bodies. The astrocytes can make some ketone bodies from the ketogenic amino acids in the brain. That's why we put these in. Then vitamins A and D, you probably know, they're also important for metabolism, for immune health, for a lot of different things, for brain signaling and so on. So we put some of these. Now, these are fat soluble. Fat soluble vitamins we've dosed a little bit more conservatively because they can accumulate over time. Then we have magnesium. Magnesium has also been studied in randomized controlled trials. So we have those very high doses. So if you take the 2 sachets at 600 milligrams, which is needed for migraine. In the B vitamins is the riboflavin, which has been shown in many migraine studies to be beneficial at 400 milligrams, which is 15,000 times the daily dose. But that's the dose that it seems to be necessary for migraine. And then we talked about antioxidants. This would be CoQ10, vitamin C, vitamin E. There we have the mixed tocopherols, which is very important. We don't want the isolated form of vitamin E. There's many different ones. So we have all of them in there. And we have a lot of names that you might have never heard of, which are the trace minerals, which are usually completely neglected, but they're also necessary for a lot of stuff. So that's molybdenum, this is boron, this is chromium. These are these kind of like very small minerals that we also need. Then we have L-carnitine that helps shuttle fatty acids into the mitochondria to make energy, which can also be a problem and has been shown to be beneficial in migraine. And then we have taurine, which is beneficial for the liver. We have choline. We have so many different things in there that are needed for a healthy metabolism. So it's supposed to be made as a one-stop metabolism shop. And the beauty is our customers do not need to take another multivitamin on top of this. This is basically all they need in one sachet. So that's how it was designed, firstly for me, selfishly, of course, and then hopefully also for other people. It's all human identical, so no systemic side effects. It's vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, under 1 grams of carbs, so absolutely keto-friendly, no artificial flavors. Swiss science, but we're now making it in the US. And these are all the ingredients for anybody who wants to take a screenshot that we just talked about. No sugar in there, just stevia.
One thing about when you study pharmacy is you learn quite a lot of formulation science. And the formulation science behind individual supplements is incredibly complicated. To produce a supplement of this level of complexity and make it palatable and soluble and absorbable.
Stable.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, it's a remarkable feat. I mean, that's, I take my hat off to you. Probably a lot of your people that you talk to won't really understand the complexities of formulation science that you've had to go through to produce this. So I think it's astonishing that you've managed to cram all this into something that is actually, at the end of the day, it's got to be palatable, because if it's not palatable or absorbable, no one will take it.
Yeah, this is basically showing the mechanisms of action in that sense.
Yeah.
So we talked about all the things that can contribute to migraine. So that starts in the microbiome, because your microbiome is actually a factory that makes micronutrients for you. So that's not working well, or you have this digestive problems, as you said, you're not even absorbing the nutrients, can also lead to energy deficiency and has been shown to be problematic in migraine. Then we have increased inflammation in migraine. We have this ROS reactive oxygen species, these bonds are increased. ATP energy is down. We have less glucose in the brain. We have a hyperexcitability, so that's increased. We have less mitochondrial functioning, and here the GLUT1. We have less glucose transport in the brain in some patients. And the beauty of these ketone bodies in MigraKet and MigraKet ingredients are that they can positively influence all of these different mechanisms together, which is why they have been designed the way they are. So we want multi-pathway. Classical pharma approaches are really tiered towards addressing symptoms. They want a single small molecule that addresses one receptor as specific as possible.
It's symptom suppression and no root cause analysis at all.
And any civilization disease is always multi-pathway, multifaceted, multi-gynatal. And this is why it's difficult for us to raise from traditional biotech investors, because they don't understand. But we really want to do it differently than the symptom approach. We want to be multi-pathway. We want to be multi-ingredients to have as big as an effect size as possible. So that's basically our mission with MigraKet in that sense. And we are already doing mental health trials. So we're not stopping at migraine. We're also going into aging at some point. So mental health, aging. And I want to say that MigraKet is not a supplement. It's actually a medical food. Otherwise, we couldn't be saying those diseases. A medical food is something between a supplement and a drug, in the sense that it's tested in a disease. It's basically let food be thy medicine is a medical food. First do no harm and let food be thy medicine. It's safe ingredients, in our case, even bioidentical, human identical ingredients, but against the disease.
And it's a specific category in the US. That concept doesn't really exist in the UK.
Yeah, so we have in Europe, we have a category called food for special medical purposes.
Yeah.
That's the closest. That's similar, but it's not exactly the same, but that exists as well. It's
Okay.
still niche, but we intend to make it big, the category.
So you've done this wonderful formulation. Does it work? What evidence have you got to show that it actually benefits at the end of the day?
So we have a small trial. The first trial we did on the first version of MigraKet that still had a third of the potency and a fraction of the ingredients we have now. We had in a randomized, placebo-controlled, double-blind, efficacy and safety crossover study, 9 months duration, 40 patients crossover. Here we had a responder rate of 30%, so 30% being metabolic migraineurs. But in those 30%, we had over 60% reduction in migraine days on top of placebo. And placebo is between 0 and 30%. So we really had 3 times gold standard in the metabolic migraine subgroup. Now we've recently done on 150 patients, done like a virtual survey. You might want to call it trial. We probably are not allowed to call it trial, but it was really like a clinical trial, just that we called it survey on the 150 first customers of MigraKet. Chronic patients, really treatment resistant, tried basically everything, nothing worked. And here we even had a responder rate now on the final formulation of 40%. So that means it's not going to benefit everyone. If you have hormonal migraine, then you need to fix your hormones, right? There's no other way. If you have no estrogen or progesterone, MigraKet won't be able to help you. But if your metabolism is suboptimal, which seems to be the case in at least 40% of patients, maybe more, because these were very, very severe patients. They're always the hardest to treat. So maybe in, like, say, the lower to medium frequency migraine, I was always estimating that metabolic migraine, where really metabolism is at the root cause, is in about 50% of patients. That's what we are estimating. We already see, just not trial, but just from a retention rate, we almost have 30% retention rate, meaning 30% of customers are coming back again and again from the launch that was 6 months ago. So this is steadily increasing. So we will see where we end up with, and I guess that's then the real efficacy is how many people are actually buying it again, because they were buying it when it isn't working. So that's in the severe migraine cases. And I think it's important to be upfront about it, that we are addressing metabolism in migraine and other diseases. We are focusing on the subgroup of where metabolism is malfunctioning. That's where we are. That's our specialty, right? That's not everyone. So we're not hormone specialists, even though hormones are important. That's something you have to address elsewhere. Or if you have a trauma and you're so stressed by your trauma, that's why you get migraine, right? We know that too. Then you have to address that, because that's the root cause that is immediately causing the stress for your migraine, and your brain is warning you about that, right? So really figuring out what your personal warning signals are is important in how to manage.
So my theory is that if it works for migraine, if it works in a fundamental way at the level of metabolism and mitochondria, what does it not work for? So where are you going next with this, Elena?
Yeah, so we're going next with this in mental health. Again, I think after Chris Palmer's book, especially Brain Energy, but also even before, there's quite some evidence that at least a fraction of, say, depression, anxiety is also metabolic in nature.
Absolutely.
Again, putting our evolutionary lenses on, right? If we go back, depression is too common. Again, depression is affecting a lot of people in the world. Can't be an accident of nature. So the depression symptoms must have had an evolutionary advantage. When do healthy people kind of get depressed? When do they start trying to avoid people? They don't want to leave bed. They're unmotivated. I think that's during an infection. Whenever we have an infection, we kind of get that withdrawal behavior, which kind of mimics the depression. So if that depression symptoms were maybe evolutionary speaking developed to save the tribe from spreading germs, spreading viruses, because then you would be depressed, you would be in the bottom of of the cave or whatever, and then not venturing out, right? Because you have an infection. Infection is increased inflammation, increased oxidative stress. These pathways could be triggered if our metabolism is wrong, right? And that could trigger depression symptoms. Now, it's not a virus that's going away because we keep eating crap and we have high inflammation, high oxidative stress. So that's what we're currently testing, whether this metabolic migraine generalizes to a metabolic mental health problem. And the next, I think, big frontier is actually aging. So we know that in Alzheimer's disease, we have a problem of insulin signaling in the brain. Now, we get kind of type 3 diabetes, which is specially localized in the brain, so that sugar can't get into brain cells anymore. They're starving. Now, a starving cell will degenerate. So there you have no degeneration. So giving alternative energy, antioxidants, micronutrients to a brain, a pre-Alzheimer brain or an aging brain could also be beneficial. And we get to study that next year if we're lucky. Yeah. So that's the next step. And we have a novel molecule in development that's even more potent, even more ketogenic, without having any butanediol or alcohol backbone like other ketone body esters have. So that's exciting. And then we're thinking about making a longevity product, just a general cognition product, true prevention that people can take just to keep their brain healthy. It will be called Brain Ritual, a ritual for your brain that you take every day if you want to optimize your brain function or your brain health without falling into any of these disease categories yet, in the hope that you'll never end up there.
So within 10 years, you'll have cured us of everything.
No, only the 40%, only a 40% of everything.
Fantastic. It's admirable that you, considering what your starting point is and what your end game might be, it's quite a journey. And I wish you every success with that. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that we should cover?
No, I think this has been a very detailed, very exhaustive interview. So thanks so much. This was a lot of fun. It was very deep and it was different questions. So I really appreciate it. I hope it was useful for listeners. Maybe you can link, the website, the Dr. Elena's more the migraine expert side with the white paper, and then the MigraKet or Brain Ritual side is where you can find out on the product. And literally, I try to produce as much content as I can. I have a whole free YouTube course on how to master migraine, where all the pillars I explain, where also if you don't have migraine, where I really explain metabolism, ATP. If you want to have a bit of a recap, we'll breeze through this a bit on what these different concepts mean. There's 5 to 15-minute videos that you can watch in your own time. Yeah, otherwise, really spread the word. This really needs to be a movement. We need to educate. And then, as you said, Greg, we can offer everything. There's a place for drugs. There's a place for symptom treatment. I don't want to demonize. If I get a migraine, a rare migraine these days, I do take a triptan because I do need to function, and I 100% understand. I think for symptom treatments, these drugs are perfect. If you need to take something every day, I would reconsider the classic drug approach.
If you enjoyed the podcast and want to find out more, join our Wellness and ProLongevity Facebook group. Don't forget to subscribe and follow so you never miss an episode, and maybe share to friends and family who might benefit. Finally, if you think you might need help with diabetes, heart disease, or any of the other diseases we discuss, then book a free consultation with Graham. There's absolutely no charge for this, and we would never put you under any pressure. What do you have to lose? Bye for now, and see you for the next episode.